de temps de paix.
The realities of smaller problems.
Who show up
for a spring election because.
And yet almost nobody applies for it. That is not a hypothetical. It is a real federal benefit in Canada, and it is designed for one very specific group of people who often fall through the cracks at the worst possible moment of their lives.
To scale up that activity even more, because the first line of defense will be a reinforced Ukrainian army, regardless of the nature of.
In this video, I am going to walk you through exactly what this benefit is, who qualifies, how much money is actually on the table, and why so many people who are entitled to it never claim a single dollar. If you are between 60 and 64, or you love someone who is, stay with me, because by the end of this, you will understand something that could change a person's financial future during one of the hardest chapters they will ever face. Let me start with the name, because the name itself tells you a lot. It is called the Allowance for the Survivor. And that word, survivor, is the key to everything. This is not a general retirement benefit. It is not something everyone gets. It is a targeted, income-tested monthly payment created for people who have lost a spouse or a common-law partner, who are not yet old enough to collect old age security, and who are living on a low income. In other words, it exists to fill a very specific and very painful gap. Here is why that gap matters so much. In Canada, the main pillar of retirement income for most people is old age security, often just called OAS. But there is a catch. You cannot start collecting old age security until you turn 65. Not 60, not 62, 65. So think about what happens to someone whose partner passes away when they are, say, 61 years old.
Your region to see a specialist or to go to a tertiary care center, we're going to cover your transportation costs 100%. We're increasing the number of Skedevac flights.
Suddenly, the household is down to one income instead of two. Maybe the partner who died was the one bringing in most of the money. Maybe there was a workplace pension that shrank or disappeared. And now this grieving person has to somehow survive financially for 4 or 5 years before old age security is even an option. That is a brutal stretch of time to be left with almost nothing. And that is precisely the window the Allowance for the Survivor was built to cover. Think of it as a bridge. On one side of the river, you have the death of a spouse and a sudden collapse in household income. On the other side, you have age 65 and the arrival of old age security and the guaranteed income supplement. Between those 2 points is open water. The Allowance for the Survivor is the bridge across that water. It carries a low-income widow or widower from the moment of loss all the way to the moment they finally qualify for the regular senior benefits. And then, the day they turn 65, this bridge ends and the next system takes over. Now let me tell you something that surprises almost everyone when they first hear it. This benefit requires no work history at all, nothing. If you know anything about the Canada Pension Plan, you know that CPP is built entirely on contributions. You pay into it during your working years, and what you get back depends on how much and how long you contributed. The Allowance for the Survivor works nothing like that. Unlike the Canada Pension Plan, it requires no work history. Eligibility is based purely on age, residency, marital status, and income. So even someone who spent their entire adult life at home raising children, who never held a formal paycheck, who never contributed a dollar to CPP, can still qualify for this. That single fact makes it a lifeline for people who would otherwise have almost no independent claim to any retirement money at all. So let me get into the numbers, because this is where people really start paying attention. How much money are we actually talking about? The amount you receive depends on your income from the previous year. And for the period covering April to June of 2026, the maximum monthly payment is up to $1,682.15. Let that sink in for a moment. That is over $1,600 a month arriving in your bank account tax-free. And yes, you heard that correctly. This benefit is non-taxable. It does not get added to your taxable income. It does not get clawed back at tax time in the way some people fear. It is money that lands and stays. Canada, but there is an important detail attached to that maximum figure, And I want to be honest with you about it because this is where people sometimes get confused. That number is the maximum. It is not what everybody gets. The allowance for the survivor works on a sliding scale. The lower your income, the higher your payment, right up to that maximum. And as your income rises, the payment gradually comes down. So the people who receive the full amount are the ones with the very lowest incomes, the ones who need it most. If you have some income coming in from other sources, you will likely receive less than the maximum, but you may still receive a meaningful monthly amount. The system is designed to give the most help to the people in the deepest need and to taper off from there. Which brings us to the income threshold, because this is the line that decides everything. To qualify at all, your annual income has to fall below a set ceiling. For the April to June 2026 period, your annual net income must be less than $30,336. If your income sits above that line, the benefit phases out completely and you receive nothing. There is no partial payment waiting for you at the very top end. It is a hard threshold. Below it, you are in the game. Above it, you are out. And I want you to notice how that threshold is set. It is not a huge number. This is genuinely a benefit for people living on modest means, which is exactly the intention behind it. Canada. Now, here is a detail that a lot of people miss, and it can make a real difference. That income threshold and that maximum payment are not fixed for the year. They change. The allowance for the survivor is reviewed 4 times a year, in January, April, July, and October, to reflect increases in the cost of living as measured by the Consumer Price Index. So every 3 months, the government looks at inflation and adjusts. When the cost of living goes up, these amounts go up with it. And there is a reassuring rule built into this. Your monthly payment will not decrease if the cost of living happens to go down. So the adjustments protect you when prices rise, but they do not punish you when prices fall. That quarterly review is why you might see slightly different figures floating around depending on when you look. The core benefit is the same, but the exact dollar amount shifts with inflation throughout the year. Canada. Let me now walk through exactly who qualifies, because meeting the income test is only part of the picture. There is a checklist, and you have to satisfy every single item on it. Not most of them, all of them. First, your age. You have to be between 60 and 64. That is the entire window. If you are 59, you are too young and you will have to wait. And the moment you turn 65, the allowance for the survivor stops, because at that point you become eligible for old age security and the guaranteed income supplement instead. So this benefit lives inside that 5-year band from 60 to 64 and not one day beyond it. Second, your marital status. And this is the heart of the whole thing. Your spouse or common law partner must have died. This benefit is specifically for people who have been widowed. And there is a crucial condition attached. If you have since remarried, or if you have entered a new common law relationship, you no longer qualify. The moment you have a new partner recognized under the rules, your eligibility ends. This is a benefit for someone who is currently surviving alone after the loss of their partner. It is not something you keep once you have built a new life with someone else. Third, there is a condition tied to your deceased partner. Generally speaking, the spouse or common law partner who passed away needed to have been someone who was receiving old age security or who would have been eligible for it at the time of their death. In practical terms, that usually means they were a Canadian citizen or resident who had reached the age where old age security applied. This ties the benefit back to the broader old age security system rather than making it a completely standalone payment. Fourth, your residency. You need to be a Canadian citizen or a legal resident, and you need to actually be living in Canada. Now, this does not mean you can never leave the country. Temporary trips, vacations, visits abroad, those are generally fine. But Canada has to be your home. The benefit is anchored to living in the country, and there are residency history requirements underneath it as well, tied to how long you have lived in Canada as an adult. And fifth, the income test we already discussed. Your own annual income has to fall below that quarterly threshold. And here is a small but genuinely useful detail that a lot of people overlook. Money that you take out of a tax-free savings account does not count as income for this test. That is the same advantage that applies to the guaranteed income supplement.
Positive for American families and American businesses. The cost of living that we're feeling on the north side of the 49th parallel in our respective provinces, the cost of doing business.
So if you have been diligent and saved money inside a TFSA over the years, you can draw on those savings without it dragging down your allowance for the survivor eligibility. That is a powerful piece of planning knowledge, and it is exactly the kind of thing that separates people who maximize these benefits from people who accidentally disqualify themselves. So that is the full check.
Recognizing how we procure equipment. Nous renforçons notre base industrielle de défense et nous veillons à ce que chaque dollar investi dans la défense
List. Age 60 to 64. Widowed and not in a new relationship. A deceased partner connected to old age security. Living in Canada as a citizen or legal resident, and an income below the current threshold. Tick every box and you are eligible. Now I want to address the single most frustrating part of this entire story, and it is the reason I wanted to make this video in the first place. Despite everything I have just described, despite the fact that this benefit can be worth more than $1,600 a month, tax-free, with no work history required, take-up is shockingly low. Enormous numbers of people who are entitled to this money never claim it. They simply do not know it exists. They know about CPP survivor benefits because those get talked about. They know about old age security because everyone hears about that eventually. But the allowance for the survivor sits quietly in the background, and grieving people who are exhausted, overwhelmed, and financially frightened often have no idea it is even there for them. Think about the human reality behind that. Someone loses their husband or wife. They are in mourning. They are dealing with funeral arrangements, paperwork, maybe selling a home, maybe facing loneliness for the first time in decades. The last thing on their mind is combing through government websites looking for obscure benefit programs. And so a program specifically created to catch them during their most vulnerable years ends up going unclaimed, month after month, year after year. That is the tragedy hiding inside this system, and it is exactly why sharing this information matters so much. So let me tell you how someone actually applies, because knowing the benefit exists is only useful if you know how to claim it.
Et le Canada tient sa cible de dépenses en défense 5 ans en avance sur l'horaire initial. C'est la première fois.
The application is not automatic. Nobody is going to mail you a check out of the blue just because your partner died. You have to apply. And to do that, you generally complete a specific application form for the allowance or allowance for the survivor, along with a statement of your income. You will need to provide proof of your identity, something like a birth certificate or a passport or other government identification.
Drag on into 2027, but I think that the Prime Minister has heard from us that we want to make sure that we get a good deal that is comprehensive and covers all of those outstanding issues.
And critically, you will need to provide proof of your partner's death, which typically means a death certificate. These documents establish the two central facts that this benefit depends on, that you are who you say you are, and that you have genuinely been widowed.
Same ambition, the same positive spirit. So let's look at just how we got here. One of Canada's first visionaries was Sir Adam Beck. And if you've...
Once you are approved in receiving the benefit, you want to make sure the money reaches you smoothly, and the best way to do that is direct deposit. You can set up or update your banking details through your My Service Canada account online or by calling Service Canada directly. Direct deposit is faster, and it avoids the delays and risks that come with waiting for a check in the mail. When you are relying on this money to cover rent, groceries, and utilities, you do not want it stuck somewhere in the postal system. Getting it deposited straight into your account is simply the smart way to receive it. Government schemes. There is one more piece of planning advice I want to give you, and it is genuinely important. Because your payment is based on your income from the previous year, there can be a mismatch when your circumstances change suddenly. Imagine your partner dies and your income drops dramatically, but the benefit is being calculated based on last year when your household was still earning a normal amount. That could unfairly reduce or even eliminate your payment at the exact moment you need it most. Here is the good news. If your income this year is lower than in previous years, for example, because your work has been reduced, you can ask Service Canada to use a current year estimate of your income instead of the older figure. That single request can be the difference between receiving a full benefit and receiving almost nothing. So if your situation is changed, do not just accept the number the system spits out. Speak up, explain your circumstances, and ask them to look at your current reality. Government schemes. Now let me talk about what happens at the finish line, because this benefit does not last forever, and planning for its end is just as important as claiming it in the first place. The allowance for the survivor ends when you turn 65. That is by design. The whole point of this benefit was to carry you to 65, and at 65 you cross over into the regular senior benefit system. At that point you become eligible for old age security, and if your income is still low, you may also qualify for the Guaranteed Income Supplement, which is the low-income top-up that sits alongside old age security. But here is the mistake I want you to avoid. Do not assume the transition happens automatically and perfectly on its own. This handoff, from the allowance for the survivor to old age security and the Guaranteed Income Supplement, is a moment where income gaps can appear if you are not paying attention. You want to make sure your old age security application is handled properly and on time, so that there is no month where one benefit is ended and the next is not yet started. A little bit of planning in the months leading up to your 65th birthday can save you from a stressful interruption in your income. So mark that transition on your calendar and treat it as a serious financial milestone, not just another birthday. Let me pull all of this together because I have thrown a lot at you and I want to make sure the big picture is crystal clear. The allowance for the survivor is a monthly, non-taxable federal benefit in Canada. It is for people between 60 and 64 who have lost a spouse or common law partner, who have not remarried or entered a new relationship, who live in Canada, and whose income falls below a threshold that gets adjusted every 3 months for inflation. It requires no work history at all, which sets it completely apart from CPP. It can be worth up to more than $1,600 a month for those with the lowest incomes, and it slides downward from there as income rises. It exists to bridge the painful gap between the death of a partner and the arrival of old age security at 65. And despite all of that, huge numbers of eligible people never claim it, simply because they have never heard of it. If there is one thing I want you to take away from this video, it is this. Knowledge of this benefit is not just trivia. For the right person, at the right moment, it is the difference between struggling in silence and having real, dependable support during one of the hardest transitions life can throw at you. So if you are in that 60 to 64 window and you have lost your partner, look into this. And if you are not, think about the people in your life who might be. A parent, an aunt, a neighbor, a friend from church, someone who lost their spouse a couple of years ago and has been quietly getting by ever since. They may have no idea this money is sitting there waiting for them. That is the power of understanding how these systems really work. The programs exist, the money is real. The only thing standing between an eligible person and the support they deserve is knowing that it is there and taking the step to claim it. So share this, talk about it, because the person who needs it most is very often the person who will never go looking for it on their own. And now, you can be the one who points them toward it.